Now here's a sign that we're really entering the final days of the Famicom. Lagrange Point is a relatively well-known game even outside of Japan for being one of the technical showcases of the system. It's one of 2 games to use Konami's VRC7 mapper, and the one that really used the chip to its fullest. Game publishers have been including additional mapper chips in their cartridges for quite a while. In fact, at this point in the Famicom's history, it would be weird for a game to not have a chip in it that expanded the Famicom's capabilities. Nintendo had their own set of mapper chips that were available to everyone, but the companies who got on the Famicom early and had an arrangement where they would manufacture their own cartridges could take advantage of that to create their own mapper chips. In 1991, several of these companies were introducing some very high-end mappers as a way to squeeze just a bit more life out of the Famicom. And inevitably, these flopped. Yeah, for your 8,500 yen, Lagrange Point has some really fantastic music. But that same 8,500 yen could purchase a copy of ActRaiser. There was no way that the mappers could keep up with that, and so these companies wound up with very technically impressive, enormous flops on their hands. So what made the VRC7 so special? Well, besides the advanced memory management and interrupt request handling that allowed for some special graphical tricks, the chip integrated some Yamaha FM synthesis hardware. This more than doubled the number of sound channels on the Famicom, and greatly improved the audio quality. Just listening to the intro for a few seconds and you can immediately hear the difference. The soundtrack is so well known that it's been issued on vinyl in the US, despite the game never having an official English translation. Lagrange Point also has an unusual origin. For Famicom Magazine issue 100, which was the April 6, 1990 issue, Konami collaborated with the magazine to design a new RPG, and they would take input from the readers of the magazine. Some things were already set. It would be a sci-fi RPG, but the staff would present things to the readers and have them decide what they wanted to see in the game. Readers helped choose enemy designs, named characters and monsters, and even compose some of the music. In fact, one of the fans who submitted music that was used in the game was Masashi Hamauzu, who would go on to have a career composing for video games, and even if you haven't heard of him before, you definitely know his voice, because he's one of the people who sing. That is a lot of preamble, but setting aside the amazing soundtrack, how is Lagrange Point? And it's actually a pretty solid RPG. Not top tier, it's got quite a few flaws that are evident pretty quickly, but there's a lot more going on in Lagrange Point than in most RPGs on the Famicom. In the not-too-distant future, humanity has set up space colonies at the Lagrange points, spots of gravitational stability between 2 massive bodies. Then there was an outbreak of a virus that turned things into mutants, and the colonies rebelled, so the Earth sent in a troubleshooter team to find out what's going on. That team was almost immediately ambushed, and Jean was the only survivor. The interface for Lagrange Point will be very familiar to fans of 8-bit RPGs. While exploring, A does a contextual action, talking to people or opening a chest that you find, while pressing start brings up a menu. Here you can use special techniques you've learned, use items, check out your stats, and equip things. And you get into random battles while wandering in dangerous areas, and there you could fight, use a technique, use an item, or run away. So those parts are pretty standard. But there's a lot of things that aren't quite the same. For example, you have BP or battle points, and rather than just being used for special techniques, any action you take in combat uses some battle points. It's basically your stamina. There's 2 types of weapons you can equip, melee and ranged. Ranged attacks hit all enemies that you're currently fighting, but are much weaker, so it's generally better to give everybody melee weapons. You get experience toward ranking up, and your power grows fairly quickly in these first few levels. I had 70 hit points at rank 1 and around 600 at rank 4. You don't get money right after the battle though. Instead, you have to go to a terminal room in town, and there you receive credit for the enemies that you've defeated. That terminal is also where you can cure status ailments, as well as rest to recover your health and battle points. Eventually in the game, you'll build a party of 4 out of 10 characters, though I had only picked up one party member before I had to stop. One thing to watch out for in the combat is that status effects and attacks that take off a percentage of your health or battle points are fairly common in this game. Typically, you're not going to just get beaten down, you're going to get paralyzed, slept, frozen, burned, stripped of over 90% of your health in 3 attacks, and then beaten. A big problem for me when I'm playing RPGs for Famidaily is just a lack of time. If a game has a slow start or makes you grind for a while before you can make any progress, I'm not going to see a whole lot before I have to move on. That was not the case with Lagrange Point. I played for a little bit more than an hour, and while I did have to spend about the first 20 minutes grinding up a few levels and earning money so that I could get equipment, once I was over that initial hump, things moved fast. I flew out to an asteroid and had to walk on its surface for a while to reach a colony, then was ambushed by killer robots on the way back, and after that started driving a car around the inside of an O'Neill cylinder, eventually getting jumped by a giant monster who just knocked me into a hole, and that led me to an underground facility. I was rank 6 when I had to stop, so I was making some fairly rapid progress there. In Japan, Lagrange Point has a bit of a mixed reputation. It is pointed to as one of the technical masterpieces on the Famicom, a game that looks and sounds amazing. But I found a fair number of people who seemed to consider that as an RPG it was second-rate. That was far from unanimous, but it was a fairly common opinion. At the time, Lagrange Point didn't sell especially well, though it did get a comics adaptation. In the years since, Konami hasn't gone back for a sequel or to remake it, so it feels like this is something they'd rather forget. What I've seen of Lagrange Point puts it in the upper tier of Famicom RPGs. Having a good presentation and a fast pace carries a lot of weight with me. Lagrange Point is one that I think I'd like to go back to.